Hey kids, it's Ask Pastor Noah, your chance to ask your questions and get answers from one of your pastors. Hey kids, this week's question is a two-part question. The first part comes from Henry, and Henry asked, why did Paul become a Christian after killing them? Well, before Paul was Paul, his name was Saul, and the book of Acts chapter 8 tells us that Saul was ravaging the church. He was busting into people's homes and he was dragging them off to throw them into prison. And it only gets worse. In Acts chapter 9, it says that he was breathing threats and even murder against Jesus' disciples. And so what changed? Well, simply, Saul met Jesus. Later in the book of Acts, it tells us that Saul had an experience where Jesus spoke to him from heaven, blinded his eyes with a bright light, and he experienced the grace of God. Paul writes about that grace in Ephesians chapter 2. He says, "And you were dead in the trespasses and sins in which you once walked. You were following the course of this world, following the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that's now at work in the sons of disobedience, among whom we all once lived in the passions of our flesh, carrying out the desires of our body and the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, like the rest of mankind. But God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which He loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, He made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved." Paul includes himself in that story of Jesus changing sinners' lives. And so that's why he began to follow Jesus, because he met Jesus even after persecuting him. But the second part of this question comes from Macy. And Macy asked, well, how did people trust and follow Paul after he killed other Christians? Well, simply put, it was really hard. The Bible tells us that when Paul met Jesus, Jesus blinded him, and then he told another Christian to go pray for him, a man named Ananias, so that he would receive his sight. And Ananias was like, I don't know, God, I don't know if I can do that. Can we trust him? And God said, yes, he's my chosen instrument. And then after he begins to preach, everywhere he went, people didn't trust him. They didn't think that he was really a Christian. And then finally, he came to Jerusalem, and there was a man named Barnabas. And Barnabas heard the story of Paul being saved by Jesus, and he became his friend, and he vouched for him. And through that relationship, God opened lots of doors, not only for forgiveness, but for Paul to use his gifts in the church and to the ends of the earth. When Paul later plants a church in Galatia and then writes them a letter, he tells the story in chapter 1 of how the person who once persecuted the church is now preaching to the church. And so here's my question for you. If God can do this in Saul's life and turn him into Paul, if he can take him from persecutor to preacher, what kind of changes does God want to make in your life?